It's the WP Minute Plus, your home for long-form discussions with WordPress professionals and industry experts covering our favorite topic, WordPress. Be sure to follow us. Search for WP Minute in your favorite podcast app. Follow this podcast in our 5-minute weekly edition, or head to thewpminute.com/subscribe and join our newsletter. I'm told it's like a warm WordPress blanket that gets delivered to your doorstep every week. Looking for all things WordPress? The WP Minute has you covered. Are you looking for a place to hang out with other WordPress professionals? A place where you can talk about the latest things happening in WordPress and have a great chance to network with your WordPress peers? Join the WP Minute Slack membership by supporting the show with a donation. You can donate as little as $5, or if you get more value out of the work we do, consider supporting with a few dollars more. It's a great value for value. Give more if you're getting more, like joining our annual membership pledge for $79 for the year. Support us and join a Slack membership at thewpminute.com/support. That's thewpminute.com/support. Hey, Scott, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
BigScoots, proud foundation. Well, I'm saying you're proud. I'm putting words in your mouth. You're proud Foundation Plus sponsor of the WP Minute. We can't thank you enough for helping support independent WordPress news and journalism in our WordPress space. We're happy to have your logo across all the work that we do. So again, big thanks to BigScoots for supporting us here at the WP Minute today.
Just rolls right off the tongue. Yeah. No, I mean, thanks for allowing us to be part of it. It's a pleasure.
Scott, we just met minutes ago. Tim introduced us and dipped off the call so we wouldn't have a third channel in the podcast edit. Obviously, I had heard of BigScoots from people on Twitter before. Maybe I've even seen it on LinkedIn. Didn't really know about BigScoots in the WordPress world, but my God, you guys are really making a mark in that WordPress managed hosting space, a very competitive space. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and BigScoots started 14 years ago. You went from researcher to CEO. I didn't see any other tech startup space in the middle there. How did you make the leap from researcher, and what was that role, and how did you get into hosting?
Yeah, well, it was more of a CEO to researcher, continued forward with the CEO bit. Lots of in-betweens there, but that's the timeline. Yeah, so we founded BigScoots in college in 2010. Feels like many moons ago. My business partner and I were eager to sort of leverage what we knew and knew well. He was an infrastructure and system admin guru, so he had his hands on the actual physical infrastructure that we still do to this day. That's kind of one of the interesting bits about how we differentiate from others in the market, being that we own and operate everything. But sort of just started from a point of, okay, what can we do that's interesting in a interesting space that we really enjoy? WordPress. It's kind of funny at the time. It wasn't really established certainly not established as we know it today. But hosting was sort of that interesting pie in the sky where we thought to ourselves, look, a lot of people don't do this very well. How can we do this better? We're going to build something predicated entirely on service. I've always been in tech generally, just enjoyed it, sort of just tech aficionado, I guess you could say. So the idea of moving into tech, leveraging Justin's skill set, we really kind of came together, with me sort of on the sales and business side of things, wearing a lot of hats at the time, taxes, accountants, all the rest of it that you have to do as an entrepreneur. But he laser focused, in his basement with the drapes drawn and what have you, just kind of focused on what he did. And we've just iterated on service 100 times over. 100 times a week, I guess you could say, up until today, 14 and a bit years later, we have an industry service leading platform for managed WordPress. So, we came from a place of just being interested and excited about offering good service, and we sort of pivoted all our ways through up until WordPress. And I mean, we love where we are. The researcher bit, that was kind of an interesting personal situation. I was in college for it was pre-med at the time, but biomedical engineering was the degree path that I was on. I did finish it, perhaps pretty unrelated to what I do on a day-to-day basis today, but it was exciting. So med school was my original inspiration for sort of digging in and going hard, but WordPress has been exciting really ever since. So
was it Justin who liked the internet and hosting bit of it? Was he building, or were you both building websites on the side? What was it about hosting that was oh, this is a market I want to go into?
Yeah, so I mean, hosting is just foundational to every online business in every facet, even with like site building-esque type solutions and other types of SaaS platforms that you might be able to like build a business around. You still need hosting at the bottom rung of everything. And that was very interesting to me. How do we create this foundational level of service that is just better than what else is? From our viewpoint, it started with infrastructure, right? If you own the whole stack, you can really affect change on the whole stack. So, that started with, ultimately it started with a single server, and that, obviously ballooned into racks and top of rack switches and core routing and edge routing and everything else. Eventually, building out our own network and incorporating all those elements of it, our own portal, team, obviously, a big piece of growth as well. But it really just came from a point of, Justin was certainly, he worked in the same data center that we coloed our first server in, so naturally he kind of had an inkling and an in for us. Made sense at the time. But no, I mean, I was building websites, so that was kind of my take on it. I had a small design agency, and I would develop the websites. I had a small team with me at the time, and the writing was on the wall. I mean, service was lacking then in the hosting industry. It's lacking perhaps even more now. So, we just stayed true to our guns, and service was what we wanted to dig our heels into, and that's what we did. But always online, ever since you could be really at as young as I can remember. I was on the computer figuring out ways to build this and make something interesting. And Justin, being more of a system admin infrastructure role, it just really blended itself quite well. 14 years later, here we are.
For you young kids out there, coloed server. So what that is people I used to, because way back in the day, I worked for an ISP, internet service provider, before my job at Pagely, well before my job at Pagely. I used to be the system admin for this web hosting company, where I would throw Dell servers in the back of my Nissan Maxima, drive it to the co-location, install it, plug it in, put in the hard drives, format, put everything in. And that you couldn't just go to a website and just spin up a cluster of servers back then. But even today, it sounds like you're building out that same infrastructure. Like you're buying the steel and selling that off with your layer of probably software and service on top of it. Do you now own the co-location or the data center? Do you rent? What can you tell us about what you own at BigScoots to give people the picture?
Yeah, so the metal, right, the bare metal, I guess as they say. Yeah, all owned and operated completely by us. We have an on-prem office adjacent to our suite in the most connected carrier-neutral facility in North America, 350 Cermak. So it's given us an opportunity. Ultimately, we're just down the street from where we started, but it's given us a very interesting opportunity to ultimately engulf ourselves in the most connected location effectively in North America, just by its positioning and its age and sort of its prowess in the telecom area. There's actually I think it's like a better part of a 5-year wait list now to get into the data center. Wow. But we were just kind of young and silly, and we're like, let's pick. We didn't at the time. We were just kind of working the path, trying to figure out the best deal and whatnot. But it really turned itself into a really good decision from a DC ops and sort of logistical perspective. Chicago is really well positioned for a lot of infrastructure providers in the area, like CDW, Supermicro, just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Dell has a warehouse there. It's very easy relative to the rest of the country to get our hands on infrastructure, and as of late, that's been more important than quite some time ago. I mean, COVID really kind of messed up a lot of the supply chains, but having your own bare metal really allows you to create really interesting dynamics around the amount of resources you can provide for ultimately the amount of dollars that the end user or WordPress site owner might spend. For example, in cloud computing, you typically get priced out of higher clock speed CPU cores, which can very oftentimes be a major contributing factor to performance. If you're a dynamic site like e-commerce or membership or something like that, you're going to find that CPU becomes your bottleneck. All those dynamic queries need to get funneled on through CPU. The faster it is, the better chance you have of those completing in a good amount of time for your visitors find their way off your page. If you can build yourself a piece of infrastructure ultimately and provide that piece of infrastructure for what could be maybe a 20 or 30% cost savings for somewhere on the order of about 4 or 5 times the amount of CPU and memory, that's an interesting dynamic. That's an interesting dynamic to a site owner who can manage their scaling costs and not have to worry about performance at the same time. If you look to scale horizontally or rather vertically, if you look to scale up your CPU, in a lot of cases, you just run out of choices. If you're with some of the larger providers, you're given X amount of PHP processes, and the CPU is just given to you regardless of what you would prefer or not. We can custom build that solution, and ultimately, we custom build those solutions with a really cost-effective profile in mind. So we're going to use our knowledge, select the right CPUs for the right workload, and ultimately we package those in plans that are easy to sign up with on our website. But signing up for a similarly priced plan between us and our competitors, by the fact that we own our own infrastructure, we're able to be considerably more resource abundant. We layer on top of that a lot of managed services, a lot of human hours, time, and attention being spent on all these sites. So naturally, our price points still need to kind of be where they are to deliver the level of service that we do deliver. But it creates this really, really interesting dynamic where you can ultimately save money in most cases and hit those really, really top levels of service and performance at the same time. So a really, really interesting dynamic. And a lot of that's predicated on the fact that we own and operate our infrastructure. A burden to bear, most hosts wouldn't want, but being that we've done it for so long, we've become very good at it, and naturally, it's exciting. It's really exciting.
Did you start the company? Well, let's say 14 years ago. Did you start with WordPress hosting in mind, or was it just traditional hosting? Hey, bring over your HTML and static sites or whatever, and then you moved into WordPress eventually. How did that transition happen, or did you start with WordPress sort of as a leading service?
Yeah, so, WordPress certainly existed at the time, that's for sure, but it didn't exist as we know it today. It was more of like a blogging type platform. Wasn't a lot of business or commerce that existed in the same way that it does on it now today. We existed in Chicago with sort of a focus on the Chicagoland businesses, so some Fortune 500s, some folks who wanted to leave the on-prem sort of infrastructure management to a professional organization such as ourselves, whether it be hospitals or businesses or what have you, folks who needed their infrastructure managed. At the time, we were doing like private clouds and stuff like that too. This predates, obviously AWS and whatnot, but even at that time, we were managing WordPress. We just didn't really call it managed WordPress. We were just a managed hosting provider. These days, we've sort of coined the phrase site-specific management, and that goes much more in line with the level of service we aim to deliver, and also kind of the unique nature in which we provide managed WordPress services. So site-specific to us, what that means is like we're logging into your actual website, we're adjusting plugin configurations, we're watching for stuck PHP processes and plugin conflicts and database inefficiencies and all these other sorts of things that will plague every single WordPress site out there. And we're sort of the partner to a WordPress site owner to alleviate those technical challenges and do so in a lot of cases proactively. So the sort of bridge between where we started as sort of a managed services provider and where we became sort of this managed site-specific WordPress provider is really just more defining what it was that we set out to originally do. We were always going to do that. We were always going to be very hands-on and part of the customers, the WordPress, the site owners or the application owners team ultimately. But we became much more sort of entrenched with the WordPress community just because it was a much more exciting place to be. I mean, there's so much going on all of the time. It's incredible to see some of these businesses that exist in and around the WordPress space, and it's amazing being part of it. But just the site-specific sort of nature of our service lends itself very well to WordPress, because as a WordPress site owner, you're going to want to focus on building your business. You're not going to necessarily want to focus on building a technical team. So it was just such an easy fit.
This might be, maybe Justin remembers the pain of this, but I remember back in the day when I was the sysadmin. So the question is, do you have a thing that like kept you up at night when you first started the business? Was there like an application that kept crashing that you're like, oh my God, there's this thing I have to do at like 2 a.m. every Saturday that I don't want to do? For me, I remember when I was at this ISP, we were like one of the very first customers when cPanel came out, and there was, I think, IonCube was the name of it, like an email client. Maybe it still exists today.
Still
Remember
there?
that?
Oh yeah.
that server would die all the time on me.
Yeah.
And we also had a Windows IIS server that we constantly had to VPN and reboot, like always on a Saturday afternoon in the summertime. We had to do that.
Yeah.
Do you have any of those fun, hopefully fun moments when you were first growing the business that was particularly challenging that you can kind of look back on now and say, well, that was tough then, but I can kind of laugh at it now?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely called out like the two, number one and number two. Maybe they're both tied at number one in terms of kind of problem children over the years for any and all system admins. You described a mail server, which is just incredibly taxing to manage. And then you also, and then Windows just in a nutshell is always kind of a beast of its own. But certainly those two are good front runners. Network operations and just dealing with scale, I would say is absolutely, number one on the list though. Network affects everything. It delivers entire production traffic to everything underneath it, and figuring out sort of creative solutions to otherwise very complicated problems certainly kept me up at night. But hire a good team, and those problems tend to go away. So that's been sort of probably the most traumatic thing over the years. I would say, just trying to figure out how to manage and effectively run an enterprise class network, and we did. It was exciting. I think I might even throw like WordPress into the ring there. In the early days, like it didn't have a lot of the same support for various services it has today, right? Even then, a lot of people wanted to push the envelope on performance, but things like Nginx and Lightspeed and PHP FPM and like some of these other sorts of things that are just like commonplace every day. I mean, certainly like Cloudflare above all else, it just didn't exist. So you would have services constantly failing, when you were trying to push the envelope for WordPress performance. And it was incredibly complicated and very difficult to manage at scale back then, before systems were in place and processes are as they are today.
I want to talk about growing BigScoots. Do you have any outside investment? It's not hosting is not an easy game without probably some capital for certainly marketing, promotion, and stuff like that. We'll talk about that maybe in a moment. But how are those early days of scaling and growing the business? More hosting customers, more support staff, more engineers, et cetera, et cetera. How was that growth curve in the early days?
Yeah, a lot of pains, a lot of pain and suffering, blood, sweat, and tears, as they say. There was several years. I want to say the better part of 4 or 5 years. We didn't take a dime out of the business. Everything was reinvested back into it. We were very lucky, very fortunate that we were both at times in our lives. I used my student loans to fund my living, for example. And fortunately it worked out. It could have been certainly a bad bet, but a lot of growing pains, especially as an infrastructure provider. Kind of unmatched, really, because you think about scale and you think about this sort of like linear ahead of you, and you think to yourself, okay, we're going to fill up this one server, and then we're going to buy another one, and we're going to use the exact same amount of clients, and then we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again. But what you don't realize is that drives fail. Clients use different amounts of resources. You eventually need to get switches. You realize that there's a cost associated with that, and managing those, and they need to be redundant, and then they need uplinks. And how do you get a riser from one port of the building to the other one? Now you need multiple uplinks. Now you need DDoS protection. That it just kind of goes on and on and on and on. And you really, we were a bootstrap business.
And then rinse and repeat that like 5 years later when the technology, the new Intel chips come out, a new AMD. Now you're like, okay, now the faster hard drives are out. And then you find yourself reinvesting in that capital. Yeah.
It really just never stopped. Originally, we were on spindles, and then those spindles were, okay, we're doing 15K. I still remember them. Everybody was super excited.
I remember those.
Go from 7,200 to 15K. Yeah, the Cheetahs, right? Barracuda Cheetah drives, I think. And then, they did almost nothing, but, it was exciting at the time.
Yeah.
Super expensive for almost nothing. And then, eventually it transversed into, a caching layer, right? SSDs are very expensive, but you could incorporate them like within the caching layer on a server. So you have SSD caching with spindle drive supporting the majority of it. At some point in time, central storage was part of our platform, where we actually had SANs, and we would deploy enterprise SSDs in there, and it just network, right, like fiber optics. How do you scale from a single siloed virtual machine up into a real solid like internal network fabric where you do have load balancing and all this other sort of stuff. And there's so many points, literally hundreds. You asked a somewhat simple question, but there's probably hundreds of like lived examples of how it was sort of like a serious pain point, and sort of overcoming it was just, frankly, a lot of trial and error. We're fortunate today to have a really, really, really amazing team where we can actually think through problems and make make good decisions right out of the gate. But yeah, in those early days, just Justin and I just figuring it out, and it was a lot of work, a lot of stress, a lot of examples. I have this one very vivid example of, I was doing a bioengineering final exam, and I skipped the last question so I could head out into the hall to answer a client call. And the teacher was super frustrated, super mad, told her what I was doing, and she gave me the extra time later in the day to finish up that last question. But just a lot of that kind of like back and forth, trying to kind of make life work at the same time you're trying to run a business. But certainly that was many years ago. But frankly, similar problems today. It's a lot of how do you overcome the next step, and you think back on the experience that you've had. Hopefully you lean into the better decisions than the worst ones, and if you're lucky, you have a good team to help support you as well.
It's a double-edged sword, hosting, and maybe even specifically manage hosting. You do have, looking on the website, you do have sort of standard shared hosting. I think I saw it starts for $7 a month. Maybe that was with the annual pricing, but even WordPress hosting starts at $35 a month. Again, that might be annual pricing, but still, what we have is this conundrum where folks see WordPress, it's free, right? There's so many web hosts available. There's always this sort of race to the bottom with customers. And if we're just looking at WordPress managed hosting, a lot of people might look at that and go, oh my God, $35-$40 a month. I don't want to pay that, right? So on one hand, you have this challenge where that sort of sets the tone for the customer. A customer who comes to you who's willing to spend $40-$50 a month might be a better customer than the person who only wants to spend $5 a month. The challenge is $30-$40 a month, you still need a lot of them, right? To really push this thing forward. I remember at my old gig, our entry-level price, so then there's the flip side, which was one of the problems that I had as an account executive, is our hosting started at $500 a month minimum. So now we go to the other end of the spectrum where people are like, oh my God, $500 a month. Like, what are you going to do for me? And it's like, no, like really to support WordPress, it takes a lot, right? Like it takes a lot. And that's where your service kicks in. How do you balance how much service you're giving folks at still such low, affordable prices? Tim was mentioning before, customers rave about you all, and customers are super happy, and they're super happy running into Tim at the upcoming WordCamps and previous WordCamps he's been to. So how do you balance that? How much service and support you provide for an ecosystem that just requires so much of it, especially WordPress? Yeah, well, I mean, to be clear, we built a business on $5 a month customers. So we love every shape and size of a customer profile, and I like to think that we deliver at every level as well. Naturally, shared hosting is meant to be more of a lower cost, shared solution, and the expectation is that there's more of a do-it-yourself element to it. Managed WordPress, I think, would be impossible to deliver at the level that we do it at if we didn't have certain margins baked into our business, being that we own and operate our own infrastructure, our own network, our own data center space, and what have you. The Google cuts, as it were, the margins that they take away from business are significant. We're also a business that's laser focused on service. So we're known for service. We're not known for that race to the bottom pricing and Black Friday promotion. So if you sign up with us, it's very likely that you're never going to leave. We have a churn rate of, less than, I want to say it was like 0.4% last time I looked. And, and you don't see that. You don't see that in hosting. People just chase the solution, right? Like people have problems, they have issues that they can't necessarily get solved, and they keep looking for a new place to get those solutions solved. Ultimately, we solve those solutions. So although our price points might be really value centric, the reality is that we make up costs on the infrastructure and network side of things. We also make up a lot of costs on customer acquisition because we really don't have much of a CAC. It's really flatlined around just people knowing the level of service that we deliver on,
and expecting it, certainly keeping us honest about it, but we have a solution and a system and a platform that delivers and does so every time. I would add to that folks on the bottom end of the market, who are just getting started for the first time, all the way up through effectively billion-dollar companies in certain elements, they all lack the same thing in and around hosting, in that they don't have good service. Folks on the upper end in the agency realm, they don't have client success managers, they don't have system admins senior enough to be able to identify complex issues, improve core vitals and performance on like a site-specific level, and do so repetitively across like their entire portfolio. And on the other end of the spectrum, folks getting started for the first time, they can't find sort of the hand-holding and the appreciation and the time well spent with each and every person to really understand what their problems are, get them over that first hurdle. Even if it's basic things like logging into WordPress, installing a theme, these are the types of things that we're very happy to do. And it's great. It's great for business. People like to talk about it. You think about, your everyday life and issues that you've had perhaps outside of hosting. You can certainly draw a lot of issues from hosting, but if you look outside of hosting, you think about other areas of your life, whether it be your cell phone bill or your internet or your cable provider or whatever. There's always issues. If you call them, they don't respond for a week, they send you a letter in mail to upsell. Meanwhile, you're having a cable for a month. Like, that's a common scenario. If that same cable provider alternatively, showed up on your doorstep, willing to fix that issue in a handful of seconds, or perhaps identified an issue before you even reached out for them, you'd be so excited to share that good experience that it just kind of becomes a little bit flabbergasting that you feel so excited about that opportunity to share that you just do. So we have a very disproportionate amount of good conversations and, likes and reshares and just sort of spreading the good word around, and doing so at every level. We have some of the largest WordPress agencies out there speaking to us about, development for their clients, because they know their clients are going to get, bespoke solutions that are ultimately going to solve their specific. And at the same time, people just getting started for the first time, maybe taking a course, we're always in those conversations, because it's like, okay, well, if you get stuck at this point, BigScoots is going to help, and it just makes it easy.
Would you say word of mouth is one of the largest driving factors for growth in your business?
Yeah, it's the only driving factor. Word of mouth is sort of the result. Ultimately, service is really what's the way that I look at it as far as growing the business. Tim, our new CMO, he's come on board. We're at an interesting point in the business where, although we've become, we're an established business, with, an industry-leading service and platform, but we've never sort of told the story. And sort of Tim's here trying to help tell the story. And it's interesting that the easiest story to tell is really just kind of listening, getting out there and connecting with people and just sort of listening to the problems that ultimately we've done a pretty good job at solving, which is just a lack of service. So, having cutting-edge infrastructure, really optimized network delivery, Cloudflare enterprise relationships, onboard solutions engineers, like, some of the best system admins that are out there. All this stuff is great for service, but ultimately, if you can listen to the problems that a customer is having and really deliberately deliver solutions on sort of a detailed per customer basis, it's very unique, pretty hard to do, and frankly, we're darn good at it. So telling the story just about service is really what our strategy is going forward.
You have 3 primary navigation items on the BigScoots website, and I would say that anyone who maybe saying that they have great support and great human interaction would, it's very easy to sort of gut check that. You go to their website and you look and you look at your 3 primary navigations. It's product, and then clients, and why us. And you're putting that clients, your case studies, the folks that host with you, and you're putting why us. You're sort of selling yourself first and foremost, in my opinion anyway. Whereas normally you might go to, any SaaS or especially any hosting site, and it's just going to be, product features, pricing, whatever, support docs, all in like the primary navigation, whereas you're leading with that. Your little chat bubble actually says speak to a human versus just like get support. So let me just put you on the hot seat for a second. What's your
pop it
take
open
on?
And see if you get a reply.
Yeah, no, I don't want to do that live.
You'll get one. You'll get one.
What's your take on AI? I mean, I've been listening to, obviously I listen to a ton of podcasts. I have friends that are in the AI space who are building products for call centers, for live chat support, trying to get everything done with AI. Do you have a take? Do you ever think like you'll switch to an AI generated chat system? What's your take on AI and how you can incorporate it?
Yeah, I mean those are two completely different questions in my opinion. My take on AI is super exciting. How we'll utilize it as a business is really as an internal tool. We actually have some initial sort of inroads. As naturally very technical people, there's just a lot of interest and appreciation for what AI is and what it can do. So sort of let's call them a lot of kind of like after-hour projects and what have you in and amongst our team. Really figuring out ways to find better solutions to commonly asked about or inquired about problems. Really at no point in time ever with just sort of a stern and completely, completely honest response would I say that, would it ever become sort of the first communication point with us. We would never put a bot up. We would never put AI between a customer and ourselves. We've done a lot with our portal already. So there's a customer-facing portal, very much in line with sort of a WP Engine or Kinsta style portal, where you can clone and stage and request new installs and all the rest of it. That's been a solution for a very long time, and we're always iterating on it. In addition to that same portal provides insights to the admins. So our admins leverage the portal for really quick proactive insights, for example, uptime, downtime, responsiveness to a particular website, stuck processes, storage issues. There's about 40 different data points that we monitor, and we do so proactively, so that way we can address issues in advance of them actually hitting the customer. A lot of our customers actually their first outreach with us is a response to one of our proactive monitors. So it's a really good way to impress customers. But naturally, we have this entire portal, and ultimately it's a tool that creates efficiency for our team. So, for example, monitoring tens of thousands of websites, for reliability and responsiveness and security and so forth, sounds like a pretty daunting task. And to my knowledge, no other host does that. But if you create a solution that ultimately empowers the admins who are leveraging it and creates efficiency, you can really scale service in a way that maybe you hadn't previously thought of. Really create, fixing the issue before it becomes a problem, so to speak. And that's something that we're very good at. I think AI can help with that. I think we can look at our literally hundreds of thousands of closed solution tickets, pull from that trends and traits and commonalities, and try to find ways to just be better from a proactive approach. But in terms of initial outreach, solving problems, what can I help you with today? Is it a domain issue? Can I get you, that type of stuff drives me nuts. And it would just, regardless of how it might affect the bottom line, it wouldn't fly. It just, I don't care what anybody says. It's never going to replace sort of a human greeting you, even if it is ultimately just pleasantries and just getting you to where you would otherwise have gotten through AI. It's still a touch point where, a customer can have a great interaction with a member of your team. And even at that level, it's just not worth it, in my opinion, to save the few bucks that, you don't need to if you do it right.
Human interaction will be the next premium people will pay for these types of services.
It's going in. It's the service gap is only growing, right? Like it's only been, you can only exist on the tailwinds of WordPress growth for so long, right? WordPress has been accelerating up into the right for so long, still growing, nowhere near where it had been. How, as a host, are you going to position yourself into the next phase of what the WordPress ecosystem looks like? And certainly detracting from your support team, there's been just speaking plainly, there's been significant layoffs, there's been significant detraction from R&D in some of these larger agencies, and you're just thinking to yourself, like, although the bottom line has to make sense at a certain level, on the same token, I feel like people are missing the button here, like what really gets people excited and what people are really lacking is service. And I think, taking away from those things just doesn't make any sense. So existing on the tailwinds of WordPress and sort of just being a host that, whether it be race to the bottom or just sort of being in that space, just right time, right place, I think is no more. I think you have to provide actual value. And I think the best way to provide value is to do so through service, just hands down. And that service translates to performance, translates to security, translates to scalability, reliability, translates to all that. So,
yeah, I'm a big believer that we're going to see, I think over the last few years, especially since the release of Gutenberg and the block editor going into WordPress core and site editor and all that stuff, I think we had that dip where a lot of people freaked out. They're like, hey, this is not for me anymore. Developers, like the folks that, were champions of WordPress a decade ago were just like, it's not for me. I don't want to do this anymore. And they sort of skipped town for a little bit. And of course it was a challenge. It was a rocky road, right? When the block editor was going into core. Anyway, all of that is to say is I think we saw ourselves a little dip in terms of excitement of WordPress and, people just being excited and providing services for it, to now services coming back again, right? So if you're a freelancer or an agency, I've seen it. I mean, I've heard from people who are like, I gave up 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and now I'm back because the other tool I was using, I just kept hitting the wall. I couldn't customize it. I couldn't get themes for it. I certainly couldn't get plugins like I could get for WordPress, but at the end of the day, there also wasn't any community around a lot of these other either closed sourced platforms, or if they were open source, they were just far too small, where you just found yourself sitting in the room by yourself. So you're just like, I'm going back to WordPress. I think we're going to have this rise of services again for the freelancer, creative, boutique agency. And if that's you listening to this podcast, let me know if you think I'm right. But number two, work with another brand like BigScoots, who also appreciates that human connection, right? Because the better things can happen. It doesn't you don't have to start your agency or your service and look for the most lowest price for hosting because you're afraid to put out the money or whatever it is. You work with people, build up a relationship. And I think that relationship, that human thing, is going to be oh so important for the next decade. If we get it that far, the next decade will be very important for us to formulate that stuff.
Yeah, value and ultimately the perception of it is really key in our space more than it's ever been. And yeah, if you're a developer, if you're an agency, new or old, I think you're always struggling for ways to provide as much value as possible. And that goes for everybody, ourselves included. And I think if you think about a WordPress site owner, whether they be brand new to WordPress or an established agency or business, they all lack the same thing, which is some level of service. And I would say that's the case for basically every type of service in the WordPress ecosystem. So whether it be hosting, whether it be design, development, it really doesn't matter. There's always a lacking of service. So if you're an individual who's willing to look and find value in as many places as possible and then provide those to your clients or your end users, you're always going to win, because there's always people running in the other direction as businesses, trying to cut the bottom line, trying to be more profitable, trying to do things, in my personal opinion, the wrong way. We set out, it's kind of funny. We had some words up on our, a recent blog post, and it was like a screenshot from our first website ever, and it was a little cartoon photo of me, and I was saying something along the lines of, service first always, no matter what. And we just kind of been preaching the same thing ever since. As I had said, fortunately we got a little lucky with finding the right people at the right time, but we were also able to build this amazing platform and really dial in infrastructure, network, and service to the level we have. But ultimately, I think people are looking for service, they're looking for value, and there's lots of ways to find that and give it to folks. It's just a matter of maybe some extra effort and looking under a few rocks you might not have looked at before.
BigScoots.com. Scott, thanks for hanging out today. Anywhere else folks can go to say thanks for doing the interview today?
Yeah, just our socials. We love interacting with everybody out there too. Also, any upcoming WordCamp. I believe we're going to be at WordCamp EU. I think we're going to WordCamp USA. WordCamp Phoenix was our last one, but if you want to keep up to date on our socials and meet us in person, we're always eager to catch up and see what everybody's up to.
Scott, you're telling me, Scott, you're a CEO without a newsletter telling people how to run their business? Come on.
That's true. It is one of those things that we've kind of lacked on, which I'm kind of happy to have. It's nice to kind of just be behind the scenes and just kind of keep the machine running from a marketing perspective. But no, I am afraid not. I'm afraid not. If you do sign up with BigScoots, if you make the decision, you're not going to get a whole lot of mail from us. So
yeah. Awesome stuff. BigScoots.com. Scott, thanks for hanging out today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode. Get the weekly newsletter at thewpminute.com/subscribe. Want to support the show and join a Slack group filled with WordPress professionals like you? Talk about the news, share your WordPress business content, and network with others. Head to thewpminute.com/support and get access to our group. Support the show for as little as $5 or more if you feel we provided more value. Thanks to our pillar sponsors, Pressable, Bluehost, and OmniSend. Thanks to our Foundation Plus sponsors, WP World, Image SEO, and Hostinger. Thanks to all of our annual supporting members and you, the listener. Without your support, the WP Minute wouldn't be possible. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.